Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Armchair Art Tours Garden Series. Thanks for your patience as we get started. My name is Melanie Blake, and I'm the Director of Classical Pursuits. I'm here today with Samantha Clark, Marketing Manager at Worldwide Quest, and with Wendy O'Brien, a philosopher with 30 years of experience teaching, whose work has long focused on art, beauty, and wonder, among other topics. I'll turn it over to Wendy in just a moment. First, like to go over some of the features of GoToWebinar that you'll need for today and tell you a little bit about the other online programs that we're doing at Classical Pursuits. So sometimes interface is slightly different for different people, but you should all have an audio function. If you look at the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a list of different features. To access any feature, just click on the right-facing arrow. So for audio, you can click on the arrow. It should expand the field, and you'll be able to adjust your audio settings the way you see fit. The other two features that are most relevant for you today are questions. We'll be having a Q&A session after the webinar. Again, expand the field by clicking on the arrow and type in your question and send it, and we'll get that. If you have any tech problems, you can also put that in the question, and we'll do our best to help you. If you have a comment that you would like to send to the group as a whole, you can use the chat function. So again, expand the field and type in your chat, and you can send that to the entire audience or just to Samantha, Wendy, and me as organizers. So I think that those are all the technical functions that you'll need for today. Just want to tell you a little bit more about other online programs you can do with Classical Pursuits. So our Thursday webinars will continue. Next week, Wendy will be back to talk about two gardens in the Southern English countryside, Sissinghurst, which is connected to the writer Vera Sackville West, and Monk's House, connected to the writer Virginia Woolf. She'll talk about these gardens, the writers, and the British garden painting tradition. And then next week, our Armchair Art Tour series moves to North America in 2 weeks. Our Armchair Art Tour series moves to North America for the first time, where Wendy will talk about Frida Kahlo and her Casa Azul, her house and garden complex in Coyoacan, a neighborhood in Mexico City. So we're excited to head across the Atlantic with the Armchair Art Tours. What else can you do? And then after that, we do hope in early June to have another virtual walk with Lisa Passold. I know many of you were with us last week for Lisa's virtual walk in Montmartre. So we look forward to having Lisa back. And I'll be picking up a few of the threads that Lisa started talking about, doing a mini series on the war that used up words, covering literature and culture right before, during, and after World War I, talking about the enormous impact the war had on all aspects of society, focusing mostly on literature in Paris, and then also Canadian, British, and American poetry and novels written during and about World War I. So look for more information on that series soon. We, as many of you know, we have brought our seminars online as well. So if you're looking for a small group experience, a more interactive experience, we have several seminars on right now and more to come. So on May 24th, we still do have some places in Mark Swick's seminar on Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen has inexplicably been absent from Classical Pursuits, and now she's not. So we have and we're also looking to have a seminar on Emma. So look for more information on that soon. On May 25th and May 26th, another of our leaders, Joyce Wayne, is heading a seminar on Dr. Zhivago, the book, and the battle between the Kremlin and the CIA. Joyce is a spy novelist with a love of the Cold War period. So that'll be really interesting to read and discuss Dr. Zhivago with Joyce. Our summer, as many of you know, our summer salon, Toronto Pursuits, is sadly not happening this year, but we are going to bring you an expanded selection of seminars in the summer, including in May with a date to be announced, a seminar on Bleak House with Nancy Carr, and in June, another seminar with Joyce on classics of Canadian literature. Joyce was also the former editor of the Canadian magazine Quill and Quire, and is going to, first time in a long time, we're going to do an in-depth exploration of Canadian classics. And Rosemary Gould will be doing a seminar on King Lear. And we'll have a lot more information to come. I think you'll see Wendy back as well, Sean, Lisa, and several other people that you've already met over the past few weeks. So enough about that, and I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. Wendy, are you ready to go?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. So Wendy O'Brien, philosopher, phenomenologist, avid gardener, lover of art, beauty, and wonder. Take it away, Wendy.
Thanks so much. And I apologize to folks for keeping you waiting. We've had a little bit of technical difficulty at my end today. But it sort of fits with my mood because I sort of have to begin with a confession. My confession is this: I've really been missing the world. I don't know about you, but I've been missing the world. We've been sheltering in place. We've been self-isolating for the past 7 weeks. And I have to tell you, I am so grateful to the amazing neighbors and friends we have that have helped us. But I'm still kind of missing the world. And what I'm missing most is gardens. So earlier this winter, just before we were all came under the crisis of COVID-19, I was actually here. This is the original entranceway to the Garden of Dreams in Kathmandu. It is a magnificent garden in the middle of one of the busiest cities in one of the busiest neighborhoods. It is a stunner. I love to go places and go and look at gardens. And I guess that's part of what I've been missing, but I think I've been missing as well my own little garden. So this is my backyard, and as you can see, it's been a slow start to spring here. I am a philosopher, as Melanie mentioned, by training, but if I wasn't a philosopher, I think I'd be a gardener, because these are my little seeds I've started, and yeah, I've got a little bit popping up. I take such comfort, I guess, and such solace in gardens, in my own gardening, and getting my hands messy, and I refuse to wear gloves, which makes people crazy. And in putting plants in and in waiting. And I guess, why gardens for me? Why gardens for a philosopher, or for any of us for that matter? Well, I'm pretty sure it gives us a place to contemplate our relationship with nature. I love this painting. This is Pizarro's painting of Jeanne, his daughter, in their garden, looking closely at a beautiful rose. It's a stunning painting, not nearly well enough known. And I think that's one of the reasons we turn to gardens, because it does get us to think about our relationship with nature. More than that, it gives us a place to sit back and to reflect away from the chaos and the hurry that surrounds us most of the time. And I would argue it does give us solace as well. And maybe it's for all those reasons that I've been missing gardens these days. But while I was sitting here in my office, feeling a little bit sorry for myself, I admit, and a little bit sad, this quote, which is on my wall, unfortunately I can't show it to you, kind of caught my attention, and perhaps in a new way. It's a quote from Cicero, and he said, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything." And since I can't go visit gardens right now, and we're having, as I mentioned, this very late cold spring, so I haven't been able to bin in my garden. I turned to the notion of the library and to the collection of artworks that I have, and books about art, and the number of gardens that we find in painting. There's a long history of paintings in gardens. This amazing work by Hieronymus Bosch. We could look at Botticelli's gardens. This is Klimt, which people are so used to his portraits that I think that they don't know that he did a whole series of paintings based on gardens. I started to think about all the gardens I could visit, if not in person, at least through the screen and through the books that I have. And it became clear to me right from the start which one I wanted to spend time on today here with you. The first place that I wish, if I could armchair travel, that I would head. And that's here. That's to Giverny with Monet and his garden, with these amazing paintings that he created. Now, a lot of people don't know that Giverny was not Monet's first garden, far from it. His first garden was here. Now, I apologize if your image is pixelized. This is Monet's artist garden at Argenteuil, and it's not well known, and very few images are accessible to us. If you have a chance, head online and do some more research about this particular image, because it's a stunner and incredibly important to understanding Monet's project. This is Monet's first project. As I mentioned, he and his wife, his first wife, Camille Dancieux, left Paris in 1873. Paris had gotten too expensive for them, and so they had gone to rent a place in the country outside of town where he could find inspiration and, to be honest, something that they could afford. So they rent this place, which is the Maison d'Aubry. And as I mentioned, it's in Argenteuil. And his friends would come and paint. And looking at these two paintings back to back, this by Monet, and then this by Renoir, you get a sense of the camaraderie between the Impressionists and their common project, at least in these early days of the movement. Renoir would come there and he would paint, and he would paint not only Monet's garden, he would paint many gardens. The Impressionists, it was one of the themes we see over and over again. Their focus on the garden up front and sometimes in behind. We see gardens not just in these two paintings that I just showed you from Renoir, but also from paintings by Manet. Sorry, it's so easy to get them confused. Monet, Givenchy, but this is Manet. This is a Manet's painting of a garden. There's also his very important painting, Déjeuner sur Herbes, which was important for many reasons. It was scandalous at the time it was shown because of the naked women and the lounging men, but it really did represent a change in gardens that was taking place. All of a sudden, there was a bourgeois class in France and throughout Europe, and all of a sudden, there was time to spend on a garden, to go to the garden, to sit in the garden, versus gardening solely for the purpose of feeding your family. And that's part of what this painting is doing. Yes, there are the naked women amidst them, and that's part of the story as well, because the garden was believed to be a place where you could escape proper etiquette, and much mischief was got up to in gardens, according to Monet. Here's another painting by Monet. This is actually of the Monet family in Argenteuil. That's Camille, Monet in the center, and you see Claude there at the side tending to his flowers, and Jean, their oldest child, leaning against him. It's a beautiful rendition of what the garden there must have looked like. So Renoir painted gardens, Manet painted gardens, but so too would people like Mary Cassatt and Cicero. You have Berthe Morisot painting gardens. This is another work by her. Why gardens for the Impressionists? Why so much emphasis on the garden? Well, in order to really understand that, we need to go back in time a little bit, away from Argenteuil in 1873 to Monet's younger life. When Monet first started to paint, when he first started to do art, he didn't paint gardens. He didn't paint scenery. He was a character artist. He used to do drawings for people of themselves and of their families, and he was incredibly successful. He didn't want to take, I guess, the time. He was a young man. What can I say? He was making enough money doing that. He didn't really want to spend time thinking about gardens. He didn't want to spend time thinking about the landscape. But eventually, he's convinced by fellow artists to go and spend some time with Eugene Boudin. And Boudin's work is the one that you have on the screen right now. It's a stunning landscape. And I don't think enough credit can be given to Boudin and his influence on Monet. Because what Boudin did was, well, first off, he took Monet out to a place to paint. It wasn't going to be painting in the studio for Boudin, and it wasn't going to be painting from memory. He would get them to go, he would get him to go and stand there and to paint what he saw. Now, both of these things become incredibly important for the Impressionists. In that earlier painting by Renoir of Monet and his garden, you saw the technique of en plein air. That is, you had a chance to see what the Impressionists believed, which was go to the place and paint exactly what you saw. Don't make it better, don't make it worse, just go and paint. In that regard, these artists were akin to their predecessors in the sense that they were trying to mimic what they saw. The term that's used in the art world is mimesis or mimetic art. And it literally means to mimic or to represent what you saw. The best explanation I know of it is that what you needed to do was treat the canvas as if it were a mirror and hold it up to the world and paint it just as you saw it, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, but just as you saw it. Now, the Impressionists would take this idea, Monet key amongst them, this idea of going to a place, painting what you see and just what you saw. He would take it a step farther than Boudin in this work, a step farther than his predecessors, which would make him a marvel for us today, but during his day made him incredibly unsuccessful. In order to understand what Monet was up to, I'm going to ask you to participate in an experiment with me. Melanie had mentioned earlier that I'm a phenomenologist, and so I think you learn a lot by doing. And to understand how it is a work like the one you just saw on the screen, this one, Sunrise Impressionism, the work that gave the name to the movement of Impressionism, how it got its name and how it got up and started, and how it could be more representative than works like this one by Boudin. We need to, well, do an experiment. So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. And I know it will look and feel maybe a bit strange as you sit there in front of your computer, but give it a try, because I promise it helps to clarify what it was that the Impressionists, and like I said, particularly Monet, were trying to capture on their canvas. In a minute, I'm going to put a slide up, but before I do that, what I'd ask you to do is to close your eyes, and not just close them, but to squeeze them really, really tight. To squeeze them really as tight as you can. And to do that until I ask you to open them. Now, when I say open, what I'm going to get you to do is focus on the image on the screen. And right away, don't look elsewhere, don't look down, don't do it. Just focus right away at the image on the screen. So here we go. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes now. And I'm going to ask you to squeeze them really tight. No, tighter. Tight, tighter, tighter. Keep going, tighter, 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 tighter. A little bit longer, tighter, 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 tighter. A little bit more, and okay, open. Cool. Now, I wish I could hear what you saw exactly when you opened your eyes and you looked at the image on the screen for the first time. But I have a feeling that you'll understand this much better from having done our experiment with this. You see, Monet wanted to capture the world just as it was, to capture the world at a glance. That was really the project that the Impressionists were undertaking. But the world isn't like this photograph. You see, in this photograph, as beautiful as it is, everything stays still. It's a freeze frame. But in the real world, nothing stands still. We know that everything is matter in motion. And the only reason we don't see the motion is that our eyes and our brain play a game with us. If we saw matter in motion all the time, we would be nauseous. We would get sick. It would be too much information. And so instead of seeing all of that motion, and another great way to understand this is to put your hands in front of you and shake them as much as you can, as fast as you can, and do that for a few minutes and see how hard it is for us to maintain focus, and how your stomach adjusts and how your eyes adjust and how you can get a headache. A lot of us I know are spending more and more time on the internet with Zoom presentations and FaceTime and webinars. And the screen that we're looking at is always moving, even though to our eyes and our brain, it seems to have stood still. If you're feeling a little bit nauseous from that, or if you get headaches, I get headaches if I'm online too long in a day. I get blue glasses, but that's another story for another time. But if you understand that feeling, you understand why we couldn't see all the matter in motion. When Monet comes to paint, when the Impressionists come to paint, they want to capture the world at a glance, complete with light and motion. Complete with light and with motion. It's one of the reasons why you'll see so much water in the paintings of the Impressionists. We're going to see one in a minute from the Tour where Monet will move. But there's lots of water, and it explains the dabs of paint or the broken brush strokes that you see in their works. What they were trying to do is capture the world not as it stands still, not the way we see it, but the way the world was. And as I said, that's complete with light and complete with motion. And those would be the two things that Monet in particular would try to be capturing on the canvas. Almost an impossible project, but trying to help us to see the world just as it is. When it came to gardens and to flowers, well, that's how come he painted chrysanthemums that looked like this. You see, they aren't exactly as they were. They're not representative in the way, for example, the works of this artist. This is Latour. He was painting these gorgeous, very realistic works that looked like these. And you notice the difference in the chrysanthemums and the dahlias between these two works. And you get a sense of, well, first off, that Monet was trying to capture the world with light and with motion, even flowers, even things in the garden. Well, it's not that they don't stand still, they never stand still. And the reflection that we see from them. It was a long way off from Henri Fantin Latour's work that looked like this. And Latour was all the rage when it came to garden paintings before the Impressionists. Looking at these works and comparing them with Monet's work like this and like this, you can also understand why Monet had to move and move again and move again, because, you know, the world wasn't ready for Impressionism. They didn't understand what the project was. They didn't understand what the painters were doing, how they were trying to capture the moment just as it was. And they couldn't sell their paintings. Famously, in their first exhibition, they will set up across the street from the Royal Academy because they can't get their works recognized. Again, if you take a look at the difference, the difference between this and this and this and this, I think you get a sense of why that was the case. It was a revolution that was going on, that they were undertaking, not on the streets, but on the canvas, to get us to rethink, relook at the world around us. Now, Monet would stay in Argenteuil until 1879. And he would create some amazing works there. But really, his style and his method of painting would hit its height when he moved to Vitry. He moved to Vitry to share a house with Ernest Hochschild, his wife Alice, and their 6 children. Yeah, sharing a house with a guy with 6 children, and it was complicated. Soon after Monet moves there, his first wife, Camille, dies, and he begins a relationship with Alice that's a very controversial part for those who are interested in Monet's biography. We're interested in his gardens, but moving to Versailles, this is where he would hit his stride in terms of starting this revolution, creating a new way of capturing the way we look at the world, at the way we, I would argue, see beauty. Now, this painting, which is one I know really well, I work at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and we're lucky to have this work in our permanent collection. I like it because it really does show you what Monet was up to. You see the light being reflected on the water, and reflection is so important for him. It grows more important as we cross his gardens and cross his lifetime. But you also see the idea of motion. Again, look at those brush strokes, tiny, strong, filled with different colors to give a sense of the water actually moving in front of us. If you ever come to Toronto, it's a stunner. It's a must-see at the Art Gallery. Now, they move here. They move into this house that they're going to share, and right away, he plants a garden. He plants a garden, and he starts to paint. And he starts to paint in a way that, well, we're more accustomed to. He paints while he's here over 200 different paintings. He starts doing series while he's in Ventoux. He starts, I think what we really see at this period of time, in the years he spends there, what we see is him really gaining confidence, a sense of, this is what I'm doing. I'm showing people what the world looks like, and they will follow along. Again, a stunning work that you have here. And I can almost see the wind, right, moving in the branches of the trees up at the top. And look at the light and look at the shadows on the walkway. You're getting a sense of his project and his studies. It would be in 1883 that he would move to Giverny, and he would move there with now his family, including 8 children. He marries Alice Hochschild, and they need to have a place for 8 children and themselves to live. He moves there to this small, beautiful, it's a gorgeous little picturesque town. And in 1883, he finds Le Pressoir. This is an early, and I can't tell if it was a color photograph. I think it's colorized. I think it was actually a painted photo of Le Pressoir, or the Pink House. He originally rents the house, but very quickly decides this is where he wants to stay, and borrows money and buys the property. The property is enormous. It was a big swath of ground. This is an overview of the gardens on the outside. And what he does right away is not paint. I find this fascinating. When he first gets to Giverny, he doesn't paint the garden. And in fact, painting isn't quite as important to him as it will be later on. What he does is he gets busy gardening. And I know this photo is dotted, is starting to decay, but I love it. I love it because you get a real sense of Monet, not just the garden painter, but Monet the gardener. And he started right away working on the first of the gardens he called Le Clos Normand. It was a pre-existing garden at the house, at Le Pressoir, but he didn't like the way it was arranged. It was too neat and it was too tidy. So he immediately took all the edging out. He immediately liberated, I found in one journal, he said he liberated the garden that was there. He took the edging boxes out and he began to think what a garden could be, what it could look like, and how it could help him with his painting. Now, this garden originally would have been the kitchen garden. He quickly transforms it into a flower garden. And something you'll notice right away is splotches of color. I wish I had a better word for it, but I don't. What he was interested in was painting these splotches of color. He would group together flowers of the same kind and the same kind and the same palette, the same colors. He would group them together. And what he said it was, and the way that he explained it is he said it was his paint box garden that he was creating. And I know I'm going to be small on the screen and I'm hoping you can see this, but this is my paint box. And if you can see the way in this paint box, or if you can remember as a kid using watercolors, the paint box, each color having its separate region and area, you get a really good sense of what he was doing in these gardens, how it was a study not only of motion and of light, but now also of color. This is the Grande Allée. This is another area often painted in Monet's paintings and also the paintings of others. Well, if we have time, we'll talk about John Leslie Beck, who came and courted one of Monet's daughters for a period of time. He was an American painter. He actually will paint the Grande Allée and take it back to America with him, which many will see as the real beginning point of American Impressionism and its coincidence with the garden movement in America. Here you go. Here you have another sense of these splotches of colors, this kind of paint box garden where he was experimenting with color. Now, interesting here, amidst the orange, you see big blotches of bright pink tulips and purple irises off to the side. And farther to the back, you see, I think it's actually kind of a mauve colored, can't tell if they're irises or they look more like there's something else right towards the back hedge that you see. But you see the purple smashed against the red. This is Monet's experimenting place. This is his laboratory where he messes and looks at the way plants really grow, not carefully pruned and trimmed, but how they grow in their natural state. And here he's also using his garden as a laboratory to experiment with color combinations. He would arrange the flowers in the garden so that every season would have their own unique palette. Every season there would be something new and new shades that would appear. He would spend hours and hours out working in creating these absolutely stunning gardens. And he had some favorites. Here towards the foreground, you'll see some big red poppies starting to flop over the walkway. Poppies were always one of his favorites. Even before he came to Giverny, he painted poppies in Argentina and as well in the Tuy. But he loved dahlias. It is a study of dahlias in his garden. And also one of my personal favorites, I love gladioli and the celebration of these tall, big plants with these bold colors set side by side, really define the garden. And in a few minutes, we'll see has an effect on the way he paints it as well. Then there were irises and peonies, all of which were some of his favorite. Again, because they were big and they were bold, and he loved the way that they would take over a space. I guess, and to be honest, I'm just thinking about it now as I look at this gorgeous image, is that it was about how things inhabit a place, how plants inhabit a place. I think that's what he was interested in watching as he watched his garden grow, as he watched the plants grow. Now, at the same time, while he's planting this garden, he didn't actually paint it. He's working on it, but he's busy elsewhere and otherwise. It would be almost, it's at least 4 years before he really starts to take his own garden as a place that he wanted to paint. When he first arrives at Giverny, he's interested in painting other things. He's interested in going out and painting the landscape. This is a very famous painting called The Stroll he does of his wife and of his young son. He also starts doing series and studies when he's here in those early years of Giverny. He does his haystacks, and there are haystacks and haystacks and haystacks and haystacks in Monet. So many haystacks. And oftentimes I've been asked, why? What's he up to? Why paint the same thing over and over again? Well, go back to what I mentioned earlier about the rise of Impressionism, and I think you have a good idea about why he would go back often to the same place and paint the same subject over and over. If his is a study of light and motion, he would go back to the same place and notice the difference between sunrise and sunset, and the sun being full above you, how it changed not only the color palette, but how it changed even the shape that you saw. Yeah, the series became really important to him because it was a way of capturing time, capturing those changes in time. And if you're with me next week, as we take a look at Sissinghurst and Monk's house, I want to return to that relationship between gardens and time. If Monet was trying in his gardening and in his garden painting through soil and dirt and seed and bulb, as much as through paint and lines and color and composition, to teach us to look carefully, to look for light and to look for motion and movement. Well, the writers and the gardeners and the painters around Sissinghurst and Monk's house are going to be asking us to think about the garden in relationship to time. And so Monet's here and he's painting this series, and it will take him a while before he'll turn his attention, he'll turn his paintbrush to the garden itself. In the meanwhile, though, he had great appreciation for his planting. He started off being the only gardener, enlisting his children to help pull weeds. I have a feeling a few of my children might be watching right now. You come by it honorably. Children should pull weeds in gardens. I'm sure many of you have had your kids out pulling weeds in gardens and have them pull out some of your prized plants as well. It's a practice. He had great appreciation for his garden, at first working on it himself and planning it himself. Eventually, he would get help. He would get, at what its height, he would have 8 gardeners helping him in the garden. But he loved everything about gardening and about plants. And he would go to the horticultural shows, and he had a chance to get to know the people who were, well, at this particular time, what was happening was we saw the opening up of the world with transportation and trade. And so all these new plants were coming from Asia and from Africa, were coming to Europe. And Monet was fascinated with the new variety of plants. And he tried many, not all of which worked, but he tried many. And on top of that, hybridization was occurring. This is, some people talk about it as the great horticultural movement that's taking place in France at the same time that Monet's working on his garden. and science is developing that allows for hybrids to be created. And he's right there. He's right in with the scientists, and he had an enormous collection of books on gardening and planting and seeds, and apparently an enormous number of books on irises and dahlias. We're going to come back to irises in a minute, but he would go with Caillebotte, another one, probably one of the least well-known of the Impressionists, but he and Caillebotte, who lived very close to him, they would go to these meetings and they would talk. They wouldn't just talk about the beauty of the plant, but they were talk about, there's another Caillebotte, they would talk about the dirt and the soil and the seeds and who was growing what and where and when and what to water and how to and when. Yeah, he loved his garden as a garden. And again, that notion of experimentation, that he would mess with different breeds and varieties, and always busy trying to find out what was the hottest new thing. Now, here's an early color picture that we have of him, and I love this. I love this photo. I love it because the garden is magnificent, and it leaves me, you know, I want to be right there, right now, sitting and walking amongst the flowers. I love the beauty of the garden. But the other thing I love about this photo is Monet. He seems so much more at home than he does in some of the more formal photographs we have of him. And look at the way he stands. There's almost a sense of great pride. It's a marvelous photograph of him. As I mentioned, he wouldn't paint his garden until about 4 years after they had actually moved in, and even a little bit longer before he really reaches his height. But I got to tell you, once he started painting it, well, it seemed like he just couldn't stop. This is beautiful, and I wish I could pronounce the name of the plant. I can't. I will destroy it. If you're interested, let Melanie know. I'll type it out. I meant to do it earlier, and I apologize. I saw this painting this past summer in New York at MoMA, and it was so breathtaking. It really was breathtakingly beautiful. The combinations, you see the motion happening, you see the brush strokes, you see the light falling. Yeah, he painted, and the way he painted, how he captured these things just leaves me, like I said, it leaves me breathless. How do you take little daubs of color and transform it into something as beautiful as this? Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier that irises were of particular interest in Monet in his garden, and in my absolute favorite Monet painting. This is it here. This is Monet's iris garden, and I'm going to take you a little closer so that you have a sense of it. You know, it's one of the problems always that we have looking at art on screen, even pretty good quality paintings. It's sometimes hard to see the depth of the paint and the brush strokes and the variations of colors, like all the little colors that are involved in it. This is a pretty good image that lets you see some of those elements. And I know this sounds strange, but since we're all inside these days and we have a little bit more time on our hand, if you can order a puzzle of one of Monet gardens, I know it sounds strange, jigsaw puzzles, but when I was teaching, I used to get my students to put together one big painting a semester. And the reason I had them do that, you know, like one of those 10,000 pieces, was because you could see on each little piece the color and the brush stroke. You gain a whole new kind of appreciation for what an artist is doing when you look piece by piece at what they put together to compose something this beautiful. It's stunning. Now, taking a look at his irises and taking a look at these irises painted by Pierre-Joseph Redoute before him, you get a real sense of the revolution that's going on, what Monet is doing, and why it took a while for people to get used to. what he was painting, to see it even as painting. You know, we expected irises to look like the irises that you see by Redoute. We didn't expect them to be these blobs of color, one more traditionally mimetic, one impressionistic. It's interesting, his irises as well, to put them in contrast with, yeah, Van Gogh's beautiful irises. And to talk about this transition as well, just as, you know, he was coming from a tradition of highly representative art to creating impressionistic images of gardens and of flowers. Monet is a precursor in many ways for Van Gogh and the rise of post-impressionism. Now, I hope you'll let me spend a second talking about this transition, because it's tricky. Many times when I hear people talking about impressionism and impressionists, they get the sense that they were doing something new, but I oftentimes hear people say they were trying to capture the feeling of the artist. And I've been known to stop people in the art gallery and shake my finger and say, not exactly. You see, Monet was still working in that older tradition, still trying to create mimetic art, still trying to mirror the world, but now with light and with motion added. What would happen in the white space between Monet's irises and Van Gogh's irises would have a lot to do with technology. You see, if that was the project of the Impressionists, to show us the world at a glance, just as it was, complete with light, well, photography, which was fast on its rise during this time period, would be able to do that. And right on its heels came film that could show the world not only with light, but also with motion. And so the post-impressionists have to do something different, or to be honest, painting would have become antiquated. It would have no purpose. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a tradition that moved from painting being about what we see in the world to painting being about how we feel the world. If you go back for a few minutes to that analogy I gave, if the canvas is a mirror that the impressionist held up to the world in order to capture it just as it was, complete with light and motion, well, Van Gogh and the post-impressionists turn that mirror around and show us not what it looks like to be in the garden amidst irises, but what it feels like to be there. Now, like I said, the Impressionists, and especially the late Monet, we'll see in a few minutes, is on his way towards post-impressionism, but it's an important distinction. What the Impressionists were interested in doing was interested in creating the atmosphere, which is the feeling, but not of the artist, but the feeling of the place. Monet actually gains that from Eugene Boudon, that early inspiration, that early art teacher of his. But when we hear about feeling and impressionism, that's what we're talking about, the feeling of the place, not the artist's feeling. As we move to post-impressionism, that changes. And now we're getting much more of how the artist felt as they sat in those places or as they were in those spaces. The big transition or the big addition to the original garden that Monet would add is the water pond. And what you're seeing in front of you are some documents that he submitted to the town or the county of Giverny for the addition of a water pond to his property. The water pond originally wasn't there. He had to divert water from the river, and it was apparently a very big controversy. The folks did not like him who lived in the town. They were always quite suspicious of what he might be up to. And it took a while, but eventually he would get permission to do just that, to build this water pond. Now, where did the idea come from? Well, if you take a look at this picture of the dining room in Giverny, if you look on the back wall, you'll see that there are a number of Japanese prints that he had. As the world was opening up and as new plants were coming to France from Asia and from China and around the world, so too was familiarity with artists from other backgrounds and cultures. And Monet developed a great love of Japanese woodblock painting. And that's where I think the idea of the water pond and what he wanted to do with it would come from. If you take a look here, you get a clear sense. And thanks to Sean Forster, this is an image that he shared with me of a Japanese, this is Hirshoga, as print and the garden that Monet would create. Yeah, the water garden was his, in his own mind, his great masterpiece. The whole of his gardens were his masterpiece. He said that quite clearly and often would repeat the line that it wasn't the paintings, it was the gardens. He created the pond, and after he created the pond, there were the weeping willows, and then the plants along the side. He would put in bamboo and any number of plants that would, and what was important for him, that would fall over the water, because he was interested in having the reflection in the water. That became key to it. So whatever you planted, it had to be able to reflect in the water, and he had to like the way not only the plant looked at the side, but it also had to look well in the water itself. Now, here's an early picture taken of him with his with the bridge. As you can see, the water bridge that's inside. Now, that water bridge wasn't in the original plans. It was put in 1895. And let's, we'll go right here. In 1895, and well, I told you that the people in Giverny weren't sure about good old Monet. And one of the first things they didn't understand is he put in not only a water pond, but then he put in a bridge and he painted it green. We can kind of I understand why he would do that. You paint it green and it blends in with all the other plants and flowers, and that might be why. But at the time, bridges were vermilion, and his not painting the bridge vermilion was quite the talk of the town. Now, a bit earlier, we saw his series that he painted of haystacks. He would go on and paint a series of the water bridge as well. We have one, and another, and another, all of them with this incredible, study of light and this enormous detail. This is from, I'm sorry, I have this reversed. It was from the earlier picture of the water bridge. But I wanted you to see just like the depth of paint and all the colors and how the strokes aren't clearly defined or lined. And yet somehow he's able to put it all together to give us something that looks like this. Yeah, it's magic as far as I'm concerned. It's truly a masterpiece. Now, when we put these all together and think about his bigger project, the Impressionist project of trying to show us the world complete with light and motion, I think that helps to make a lot of sense of what we're seeing here. And that is, he paints it over and over again in different lights. There's a story told that when he got up in the morning every day, first thing he would do is he would throw open his windows and he would look outside. And if there was beautiful light, he would head out right away and he would paint and he would be happy for the day. But the family knew that if he woke up in the morning and the light wasn't good, not going to be a happy day. Not, just wasn't. He painted it in different light, but he needed some light to be able to paint. And so over and over again, we see the bridge being done. And also in different seasons, and hence a different palette. Here we have much more spring-like colors. And here we get into fall. And yeah, not an often recognized painting by Monet. It is this one of the water bridge, much more the darker colors of fall, and also something else, much more abstract, which has to do with something that was going on at this particular time. He painted the water bridge, but really what he painted most often and most famously were the water lilies. The water lilies, I have a quote from him here, if you don't mind me looking down for a second, because I think it's quite beautiful. He said he painted the water lilies. I've painted a lot of these water lilies, modifying each time my point of view, renewing the subject, following seasons of the year, following different luminous effects engendered by the changes. The effect varies incessantly. The essential of the subject is the mirror of the water, which is the aspect that changes itself thanks to the expanses of the sky, which reflect in it and spreading light and movement, the passing cloud, the refreshing breeze, and the threatening and falling rain. I'm not sure if you know, we have a lot of his letters and some of his journals, and he writes almost as beautifully as he paints. Not often about his garden, but we got some good one-liners from him on it. But this idea that this was his life's work, that he not only created this garden, but painting the lilies defined who he was and what he was. Now, it's hard for me to give you any sense of what the water lily paintings are like. First off, there's the simple size of them. These were taken by me earlier this year at the Orangerie in Paris, where some of them would find a home. Just look at the size of these paintings. I was trying to capture one in one screen, and it's impossible. They are enormous. And here at the Orangerie, they're on rounded walls, which adds a whole other level of complexity to our being able to appreciate them. That's one of the challenges we have with them. The other challenge, oh, that's me. The other challenge is to be able to, on a screen, kind of capture the delicacy of his work, like these tiny little water lilies, which, by the way, he went to a very special importer for, and he was very involved in different colors, and he didn't want often the whites and pinks water lilies, but he was looking for these bold colored water lilies that were very expensive and very hard to get. Interestingly, his dealer in water lilies, the company still is in existence today. But here I like the delicacy. There's a little bit of yellow and these little bits of pink, and oftentimes when we see them in full blown, we miss those elements of it. We miss these kind of little splotches of color that magically appear, amidst all of the purples and blues and grays, this little bit of pink that's there. And oftentimes looking on the screen, I know this isn't the most beautiful, perhaps, blow up of a piece of one of the water lily paintings, but I love it because you can see sort of close to the middle, a big, thick splotch of paint. So you're reminded that just as the garden is a sculpting, just as the garden is sculpting with plants, it's three-dimensional. He made his gardens on these canvases three-dimensional too. There's a depth to the paint. And sometimes I think that the challenge of all of that makes it hard. And we could talk about his brush strokes. All I know is I just love standing in front of them and looking and looking and looking a little more. Now, as I mentioned, he built the water pond in the late 1880s. In 1902, he would build this space. This is his studio that he built right down in the area right by the water pond, so that he could look, still keeping that notion that he wanted to paint the world just as it was, what he saw in a glance. He would, as of 1914, he would become obsessed with water lilies, and it would be the only thing he wanted to paint, and the only things to a great extent that he did paint. He was interested in showing them, showing the grand, I'm sorry, lost my place, I apologize. He was interested in creating what he called the grande décoration, in creating these gorgeous, large canvases. Now, there's lots to think about in terms of what he was doing and why he was doing it at the time. He's here in his studio and he's creating these biggest pieces. And many of you might have seen smaller water lilies. Most of them, well, a terrible thing would happen when the house is eventually sold, and that is by the Monet family, that the paintings were taken apart and were sold one piece at a time. So here, this is in MoMA in New York City. It's a magnificent one of his grand decorations of the water lilies, but it took a long time for them to be able to buy back all three pieces because they had been sold separately. It's heart-wrenching to think what they must have been like missing each other, and the different meaning that they would have had they not been shown all together. Now, a couple of things. Why the big canvas? Well, it could have been the fact that by the time we hit 1914, Monet's eyesight is starting to be lost. He would suffer from cataracts. And so maybe the bigger canvas made it easier for him to paint. It's interesting that as the paintings get bigger, the subject matter gets smaller. You know, we're dealing with tinier and tinier elements and aspects, not the whole garden, not that view even of the water bridge, but now tiny little parts of what was reflected in the pond become the focus of our attention. It's hard to capture that here on the screen. One thing to note that you can get here is that notice there's no frame around them, and notice that they bleed right off the page. These paintings don't have a clear separation between where this garden ended and where we begin. And I think it's one of the things I love most about them, is that they encompass you, they embrace you, you get picked up and taken in with them. Like I said, trying to show the water lilies on a screen is incredibly complicated. I can highly recommend, and I don't do this often, this is a brand new book that came out on his water lilies with superb reproductions. I've included it as well on a handout of resources that we'll post up later. What he was doing here is, again, capturing what he saw. But as you see it with these paintings of the water lily, reflection becomes increasingly important for him. You know, he's not interested in showing us the plants on the side, but only the plants as they're reflected in the water. The reflecting surface. Okay, I gotta have to stop. What a stunning painting. And this is the reproduction. It's a reproduction of a reproduction of a reproduction. You can imagine seeing it in person. It brings tears to my eyes. Yeah, this idea of showing us the reflection of things, and that they're not always what they seem, became important to Monet in these works, increasingly so. I can tell you, I didn't really understand these paintings and the importance of reflection, or why he wouldn't paint the beautiful trees on the side with the water lilies around floating, why he wouldn't paint the bridge until this past summer, actually it's past fall when we were away, and I was here. This is just north of Montreal in the Laurentians, and I saw these beautiful trees, but then my attention got drawn to the reflection in the water and how beautiful that is. And you see the motion again, and you see the light, and you see in some ways in these reflecting ponds and pools, you see the completion of his project, of that desire to show us the world complete with light and with motion. Now, he's painting these is starting in 1914, and he's painting them in Giverny, which would end up being incredibly close to the front line. The town would be deserted. In fact, most of the people who were at the house at the time would leave as well. But Monet stayed, and he writes about hearing the guns in the background as he's painting. And I can't help but think of how that changed. Again, one of my favorite of his water lilies that we're looking at here, how thinking about hearing the guns of the war behind him, he's painting a work that looks like this. This is what he wrote about being there at Giverny during the war. He said, "As for me, I'm staying here at the house, all the same, and if those savages must kill me, it will be in the middle of my canvases, in front of all my life's work." A beautiful line. I'm going to reread it because it's so lovely. As for me, I'm staying here all the same. And if those savages must kill me, it will be in the middle of my canvases, in front of all my life's work. Well, we can see in these later works, he's moving away from figurative painting. He's moving more towards abstract notions, more away from the broad landscape to the small. He's focusing our attention on these little tiny elements and aspects, just the merest of reflection on the water. And well, aren't we lucky what beauty we can see? I guess that's what I was thinking about when I was longing for gardens and thinking of where we could armchair travel to, that this is the time perhaps for looking at beautiful small things, of paying attention, of focusing on moments of light and of motion. Monet would die in 1926. He would die at the age of 86. As I said, his work would get increasingly abstract. Some people say that had to do with his eyesight. Some people say it had to do with his own realization of photography fast on the heels. In many ways, those late water lily paintings really serve as a great precursor for the rise of abstract painting, and also for expressionism. Monet's impressionism gives way to post-impressionism and then expressionism on its heels. Now he dies, as I said, at the age of 86, and his daughter takes over managing the house and the gardens until 1947. And then the property leaves the family and the garden is left pretty much abandoned. It was left abandoned until 1970, when two French businessmen and culture icons, Gerald Verdekamp and Gilbert Vahey, I want to give them a lot of credit. What they did in 1970 is they started to restore the house and the gardens. Now, it wasn't a quick project. The gardens didn't open to the public until 1980. And it's not exactly as Monet had thought it would be. It's not exactly as he mapped out the garden. Most notably, that kind of paint box element where you had one color and one flower in one spot along the Grande Allée. That's been abandoned. And they don't just grow plants that Monet grew. They try to take up his spirit of experimentation and expand on it to bring in new varieties and new hybridizations. But they do keep to his rule that there would be no double flower in his garden and no grasses. So the garden remains, it's open, I think, from the end of April to November every year. Now this garden, which Monet cared for on his own with the help of his children, now it has 11 full-time gardeners the last time I looked to care for it. Hopefully someday, in the not too far future, but in a safe future, we'll be able to travel there and think of Monet's great revolution, his great love of the little things, his reminding us to focus on finding beauty and making beauty where we are. Hopefully we can do that together. But for this afternoon, thank you for joining me on this armchair tour of Monet Giverny.
Wendy, thank you so much. Let's give a virtual round of applause to Wendy for her talk. I hope I speak for many of you in saying I've learned so many things that I didn't know before. Thank you so much. So we'll move into the Q&A. Let me just pull up the questions here. And again, so if you expand the question field, you can type in your question. We do have a few that have come in already. Just a few kudos for Wendy. Thank you. That was excellent. I loved this. Just lovely. So thanks everyone for your kind comments. There was one question I do need a clarification on. It was from I believe, Linda, your comment said just English writer, and there wasn't anything else in the comment box. So if you could clarify, that would be great. And also, Elizabeth has provided the name of the flower, Wendy, that you were talking about. The
Can you say
agapanth,
it?
yeah, agapanthus, or lily of the Nile.
I knew lily of the Nile, but I wasn't going to try the other one because it sounds like a disease when I say it. So I apologize. And thank you.
Um, all right, so I do have some more questions coming in. Let's see. Oh, this question, Wendy, is more about your work. Bobby asks, what is a phenomenologist? So could you tell us quickly what that is?
Sure. A phenomenologist is close to an ethnographer if you are in sociology. But basically, what we do is we do philosophy a little bit differently than most traditional philosophers. Most people start with theories and then try to apply them to the world. Phenomenologists are big on going out into the world to explore and observe what's around them, and then a little bit later coming back and finding time to reflect on it and developing theories out of those reflections. So it's the idea that we're committed to the phenomenon first, to looking and observing and paying attention to the world before we develop those theories. And just expanding on that, I think that's one of the great things about Monet. Monet teaches us to pay attention, to pay attention to the little things, both in his painting, but also through his painting, those tiny little brush strokes. Sorry, this is my best motion I have for it. These tiny little brush strokes that he uses that focuses us on, one plant or one flower. Now he's phenomenal for teaching us to pay attention, particularly the water lily flowers. You can just look and look and look and look and see something new every time you turn to it. So a good phenomenologist of art, we spend a lot of time looking at paintings and before we try to develop a whole lot of theories about painting. So thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. One clarification from, oops, I just lost my place. I think it was from Louise. Yes. Louise asks, did I understand it right? Monet didn't want any yellow flowers in his garden.
Yeah, there were some colors he wasn't so keen on. And yeah, yellow. I did at one point in time have yellow dahlias, a photo of them just to show the beauty of the dahlia. And I went, no, that would not have been approved of. He was really interested in trying to put reds and purples and blues together. He had didn't have a big palette, but he would take a smaller set of colors and work on shades and hues. We do see some yellows in some of the water lilies. You'll get this little blotch, but not big yellow. And it's so funny, especially when you look at those pictures of the Grand Allée going up to his door that seems filled with yellow grasses, and you realize it's actually not the plants, it's the reflection of the light. And that's what we're seeing. So yeah, not a big fan of yellow. He had rules: no grasses, no double flowers. He had people he wouldn't buy from, he wouldn't buy seeds or bulbs from. Very principled.
And actually, the next question follows up on this, which is good. So Sandra asks, what is the reason for not having any double flowers?
I think he was, in some ways, so I guess the best way I can explain it is I like old flowers too. Like there's older varieties of flowers, and you see in his gardens the gladioli, you see peonies in his gardens, you see an older kind of grouping of plants. They're much more traditional, I guess, to the environment. And the double flower he just thought was not necessary. If you were going to hybridize, that wasn't the way to go. And I wish I could give you a better answer. He just wrote it as a rule for his gardeners: no double flowers. I imagine that's probably what it is. He was trying to also keep plants that would fall the way they were meant to fall. So he didn't like dwarf things, for example, either. You see the big, tall bearded irises. And sometimes they're laying over the walkways in both the paintings and also in the garden itself. And that was what he wanted. Next week, as we talk about Sissinghurst and Monk's house, we'll also talk about Robinson, who was really important in the wild garden movement. And we know that Monet had a copy of that book with him. And it wasn't wild garden, you know, go throw wildflower seeds in your front yard, but it was to create a garden where plants were allowed to be plants and do what they did, not so manicured, not so neat, not go back to nature, but somewhere in between. And so I think he's really influenced by that notion that, you know, don't dwarf things, don't make them something that they're not just to look pretty in your garden, but to allow them to fall and to grow as they should. He actually took all the boxes out. He actually took a lot of the supports out that were in the original garden to hold up vines and the like. He said if they crawled along the ground, they crawled along the ground. So
just a couple of people are just asking, could you talk a little bit more about what is a double flower?
Well, I can best explain it because I have a flower called a Rose of Sharon. I wish I could show you one right now. But a Rose of Sharon it's got one row of petals. The doubles are breeded so that they get layers inside. So you get a thicker, fuller kind of flower. It has more of those petals in, so it's a double. So a Rose of Sharon is a very unique looking flower. It's almost, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's almost like a lily, but when you make it a double, it becomes full like a rose, almost like a peony. It's filled up with its stuff in the center. So that's my very untechnical definition. I apologize.
I can include an image of a Rose of Sharon in the follow-up.
Yeah, and
Wendy, if you have one you like, I'll make sure to include that.
Sure. Yeah, we can do a single and a double, and you can get a sense of what happens when you double flowers.
A couple questions about that go a little bit more into Monet and his psyche and his well, I guess one question kind of in between these two topics. Beverly asks, was he a wealthy man? You know, judging from the large house and the paintings that he had.
No, not at the beginning. At the beginning, because he was always interested in doing this new kind of painting, this new kind of revolution to show the world, like I said, with light and with color. What was a problem was he couldn't sell his paintings. They wanted paintings that looks like some of those older, like Latour that we looked at, which are beautiful and fine, but that's just not his project. He wanted to paint differently, and he couldn't sell his paintings. He couldn't get dealers who wanted to buy his paintings, and that's the reason why they would move and they would move again. It's why they left Paris. They didn't have enough money to stay in Paris itself. And then it wouldn't be until he's at Giverny. That's why he had to borrow the money to actually buy the house. He borrowed it from his dealer. It's not until he's there, it's not until really towards the end of his life that he actually starts to sell, and Monet becomes Monet. Now one of the most recognized and most loved of all painters. For most of his lifetime, he was anything but. And yeah, they lived in poverty, especially during those early years. And it was a rough life. And he stuck to his principles. You know, he could have always gone back, and it's the reason why I like mentioning that he was a very successful caricature portrait drawer because he didn't go back, and he could have at any time. He could have gone back and made a lot of money, but he was really committed to this new project and this new way of seeing the world. So sadly, not until the end of his life.
A couple of people are asking about, including Dawn and Cindy, are asking about the changes in his mental health. Cindy says, I believe he suffered from depression. Are you aware of how this affected his painting? Like, did he paint less when he was perhaps more depressed? Or did he use painting as a way to immerse himself? Like, um, yeah, was he perhaps more passionately immersed in painting when he was more depressed? Can you speak to that at all?
It's not something that I know a lot about, and I know um, more has become more and more. We've become kind of interested in his interior life, and unfortunately, we don't have more and more resources to be able to help with that. Best I can do is I can ask a colleague of mine who's interested in painting and mental health, and see if she knows any more. And I'll be sure to get back with Melanie. I'm sorry, I just don't feel confident to talk about how his depression affected the work.
Yeah, no worries. A couple people are just asking about the name of um, the building mentioned in the first slide. Um, what is the name? What was the name of the place? What was the name of the building or place mentioned in the first slide? You have
Oh,
the gate. You had a gate there.
oh, that's the Garden of Dreams in Kathmandu.
Oh, yes, yes. Um, okay. There's a few practical questions about Giverny. I'll try to group those toward the end. Gina, I think you covered this a little bit, Wendy. If you could just clarify what happened. Gina asks what happened to him and his paintings as the war reached his home.
He stayed, which is me reading from there, and the paintings stayed. Uh, and I don't know. It is peculiar that it wasn't damaged, and that he was this huge patriot. So reading some of his works, and some of his writings from those late years when the war is going on are kind of heart-wrenching. He was a huge patriot, and he seems to feel sad that he can't go and fight, but he's an old man now and he can't go and fight. And so there's one line that I read where he says, "I can't fight, so I will stay and I will paint," as if that was his contribution. That when they would come back from the war, that there would be something beautiful, or that if they lost the war, a document of another time, a better, more beautiful time would remain. So yeah, he was there. There is a great book which I think I have close to here. It's called, I have it on the list. I thought I had it here with me. It's called Mad Enchantment, Claude Monet and the Painting of the Water Lilies. I have the jacket of the book here. It was written by Ross King, who won the Governor General's Literary Award in Canada twice. It covers especially those last years, and seeing some of the pictures of what was going on in the war at the same time as he's painting. Like I said, it puts a whole other backdrop. It brings into relief the painting in ways I know I didn't appreciate until I thought about the time and read his own words.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Dawn is asking about the lilies. If you could talk more about the lilies in the Musée Marmottan, which is a private museum in Paris. I don't know if any of the images you showed were from any of the Marmottan paintings.
No, and I have to admit that I don't know a whole lot about those particular paintings. My focus has been on others. So I apologize again, and I will try to get some more information about them to you. I wish we could talk back and forth, but about what you see and why you love them. But unfortunately, I just can't answer that question. Sorry.
And a few people are asking if we could put certain slides up again, and if you'll get a recording. So yes, we always do a follow-up email to everyone who attends our webinar, sending them a recording, so you can look at it at your leisure. You can focus more on particular slides that caught your eye. So yes, you will be able to study this as closely as you want. A question from Julie that I guess I need you to, we'll take a few more questions here before we wrap up, just a few more. Julie, if you could just clarify, she asks, even if we hated their politics, do we owe them a debt of gratitude too? Could you clarify a little bit who's who, and yeah, just a little more information if you want to, and I'll try to get back to your question. Let's see. Karen asks, did any of Monet's children become artists?
Yeah, his one daughter did. I wouldn't say she became particularly well known or successful, but she also is. And I'm just looking up her name. I apologize for looking down for a second. That's what I'm doing. She is the one that would stay and take care of the house and the gardens until 47, when the house is sold and the paintings are disassembled and are taken off. So yeah, one of the children did stay, and in the wrong place. Blanchette was the one that became the only one that became a painter herself. And like I said, she would stay at Giverny and take care of the gardens until the house was sold. We didn't talk about the orangery and those round rooms. One of the most fascinating things is all those paintings were on frames, and they would be taken directly from the frames in the house in that enormous studio he built, and they would be they're actually glued onto the walls. And the skill of the people who glued those onto the walls, it astounds me. The whole ability not to destroy the paintings and to get them to line up, it is a whole other talk and a whole other discussion unto itself, because it is a marvel. And to stand there in the orangery with, these in the middle of the room with these incredible lilies around us, it's a life-altering moment.
I really hope we can all go there soon.
When it's safe.
Yeah, when it's safe. Okay, so Julie did clear up. She says that she's talking about the Reader's Digest founders. She's saying they underwrote part of the project of bringing about they underwrote the project of recreating the garden. Yeah. And so Julia, you're asking, even if you don't agree with the Reader's Digest, the politics of the Reader's Digest founders, do we owe them a debt of gratitude? Wendy, go ahead.
I have to say the gardens were left. They were abandoned until they picked them up in the 70s, and so I agree. I may not appreciate all of the other political actions of the people involved, but to resurrect the garden so that we can walk through it today, I think is a thing we have to give them credit for. I don't think we have to agree with everything to appreciate that they did one good thing. And I would hate for that to get overlooked. And if you have a chance to go, it's just so stunning to walk through and see the flowers and imagine what it must have been like for him to stand outside and paint. It's remarkable.
Yeah, several people here are sharing memories of their own visits to Giverny and just appreciating how this webinar has taken them back there. A question about the garden in particular, and I'll just do this question and one more. Sandra asks, what was the original color of the bridge? Did it change with his depiction of the season and light? I think you're talking about the Japanese style bridge, Sandra, I think.
Yeah, the water bridge. Yeah, it was, he had it painted green, but again, you see it different colors in different ones of the series that I showed you. And you're absolutely right. It depends on the light based on the season, and it depends on the light of the day. So sometimes it looks almost ghost-like white in some of the images, and other times it's this bright, brilliant green. And that's what you're seeing. It was actually painted green from the start. As I mentioned, it was, to us, we might think, yeah, who cares? It's green bridge. But at the time, it was all the talk of Giverny that he dares to put a green bridge in his garden. So I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the difference in season and the different in light being reflected. And if you have time, like I said, we had a few technical difficulties with some of our images before we got started today. But if you have time, there are so many great websites where you can see in higher definition, and you can explore some of these paintings. And to look at the water bridge in its variations, it is a remarkable thing to do. You understand better what his project was and how he was trying to accomplish it. Also, I have a list of resources. I'm not sure if it is on this page, but it will be. I know Melanie will post it with some great books that I love about Impressionism and about the gardens in particular. There's also 2 really great videos that have come out, and I know some of you, if you have access to something like Canopy, you can watch them for free. And that's also a wonderful thing to do, to walk through those gardens with other people and see and hear their reflections on it and the differences that the season and the light does make. It's remarkable.
Great. One more question about, I think that is a nice way to kind of wrap up the tie between the gardens and Impressionism. And just for those of you, there are several questions about the practicalities of Giverny, where it is, who owns it, is it a day trip from Paris? So I will include that information in the follow-up. It's in Normandy in the department of near the Seine. And yes, it can be a day trip from Paris. So we'll include practical information about that. But I do want to turn to this question from Norma to wrap it up. She says, I'm having difficulty understanding 2 statements made in the lecture. She gives one here, so let's take this one. First, that Impressionism captures the feeling of the place.
Mm-hmm.
How can it not also reflect the feeling of the artist?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And again, it goes back to the project of Impressionism and their attempt to show the world just as it was. But I guess, and in one of the quotes I read to you from Monet, he does talk about, I see it from where I stand. I see it from, the perspective that I am. What I just wanted to make clear is that it wasn't about how I feel. So if I'm feeling really joyful, I'm going to intensify the colors. That sort of that kind of post-impressionist idea, where it will be not just what I see, but how it makes me feel when I stand there. That idea, as I mentioned, of turning the mirror around and showing us not the way the world looks, but how I feel as I look at the world. That's not really Monet's project. Maybe towards the end of his life, as he gets more abstract, as he knows about the rise of photography. But yeah, he wanted to keep this as something. The painting still was something that we saw with our eyes and didn't just feel with our hearts. That it was about the atmosphere, and that was the word that gets used over and over again, that they were trying to create the atmosphere of the place and not recreate the emotion of the artist. And yeah, it's a slippery slope. I give you that. And I'm not sure how you can perfectly distinguish one from the other. But I do understand that this isn't expressionism. This isn't about how it makes you feel. This was about the way we saw the world. That we'll have to wait a little while for Van Gogh and Cézanne and then the abstract expressionists to come along to have painting show us the inside instead of the outside of ourselves.
Well, again, Wendy, thank you so much. Please come back, everyone, next week. Wendy's going to talk about Sissinghurst and Monk's house in the countryside of Kent in the UK. So thank you again, Wendy. This has been terrific. Have a good week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.